Welcome to the NBA Hangout presented by Playbook Sports. I'm your host, Brandon. With me, as always, is Dave. Dave, how are you?
I'm good, Brandon. How are you, pal?
I'm doing okay. It's been a minute, been a few weeks, maybe even about a month since our last podcast, but we're here. We're getting ready for the NBA season, the 2024-2025 NBA season. Media day is just starting. We're getting some quotes out of there, but I think for us, there is news. We actually got news to talk about. We got lucky with a big trade happening. We got Cat heading over to New York with Randall DiVincenzo and a pick heading over to Minnesota. So we have that to talk about. I think today we could also preview the Eastern Conference, and then next week we can get in the Western Conference, and the week after that into some award talk. But how have you been? How have you been in our little time off, our little hiatus?
Yeah, I've been good. I've been a little disappointed in the NBA offseason, if I'm honest. Like, it wasn't a newsmaker, in my opinion. Like, we had the Olympics and everything. I'm not an Olympic basketball guy. Like, I'm just not an Olympics guy. So it wasn't all that exciting of an offseason. Like, even at the end of last year when we were doing, or last season when we were looking at some of the offseason moves. Like they weren't like thrilling me. Like my socks never got blown off.
Yeah, nothing that was like super crazy when we broke down that offseason.
No. So a little, let's just say I'm ready for new basketball.
Yes. Yeah. New basketball is right around the corner. Just to touch on some of the FIBA stuff, what was interesting about that? Like the one takeaway, if I had one coming out of the FIBA tournament, like the Olympics, was I don't know if America's a clear-cut favorite going into the next one. I think a lot of those teams, like once Steph, KD, and LeBron age out, I think the playing field kind of gets a little more even, kind of like how the NBA has turned out, more parity around the league. I think we might see that in international play. America kind of still has the stars, but I think their top level stars are starting to blend in with some of the international guys.
That's fair. I still think like the depth of an American team is just gonna be too much. It's like it's kind of the reason I don't like Olympic sports, at least Olympic team sports. Like basketball is this way. Like America is just too deep. Like even if the stars at the top are relatively equal, the depth is too much to overcome.
The depth is overwhelming.
Yeah, it's the same with like Canada and hockey. Like it's just there's too many guys to choose from, and it's just like one super team versus a bunch of other like pretty good teams.
Yeah. It's just usually how it goes. Like Canada had like the second most NBA players, and they weren't nearly as deep as America was.
Nowhere close. Yeah.
So that's where it gets tricky, and you're relying a lot on like those international systems to kind of carry you through those games, which is how France kind of snuck up on them. Serbia kind of snuck up on them with that type of play. So I am curious. I'm a little more intrigued going into the next couple of years. But yeah, that depth and that talent pool from USA is always going to be bigger than the rest of the field. But back into the NBA, we do have that Cat trade. So like first impressions on that, like mentioned, Karl Anthony Towns heads over to New York, reunites with Thibodeau, and we got Randall DiVincenzo and a first round pick from Detroit, top 13 protected, heading over to Minnesota, with some pieces heading over to Charlotte just to round things out financially. So first thoughts on that.
It seems like a low-key trade, but I also like really like it. And like it shouldn't be low-key because you have two guys who have like all NBA honors getting traded for each other. But I actually think it provides balance to each team in a way that is more helpful. Like Minnesota had a top 6, and the 6th was a 19-year-old rookie point guard. This helps them like just get to be a deeper team that feels like more spread out, and just like it, Minnesota feels more complete with this trade. Feels more like a team that I can trust to go deep into the season and deep into the playoffs. And I like the way that Cat fits New York because he can play 4 and 5. You can play him with like Mitchell Robinson if you need like a proper 5 on the court, or you can play him at center and bring out like Josh Hart, and everybody loves Josh Hart, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
he just
yeah.
glues that whole team together.
Yeah.
I'm a little worried. Like, I'm only a little worried with New York when it comes to like 1 and 5 defense. Like
Right.
everything else is like potentially all defense. Like all the wings between OG, Josh Hart, Bridges, like that team will be able to defend big wings, but like Brunson's only 6 foot, right? You wouldn't say he's a bad defender, but he has all of the challenges of a small defender.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And then Cat is like a proper 7 feet, and like he'll get rebounding numbers, but he's just always one of those guys that like you kind of worry about his like defensive intensity and his defensive like decision making. But maybe the second time with Tibbs it like sticks, right? Cat's an older guy.
Right.
He's never had an opportunity like this in the NBA before. He's learned to not be the number one option on a team.
Yeah.
Like
he's gone through it.
He's a different guy than the last time Tibbs coached him. And like,
he's seen a little bit of success in the last. He's seen a little bit of success, so like that's over there too. He has that motivation. He's going to a team that's looking to make some big noise in the Eastern Conference this year. My first impression on the trade, it was just, to me, it was just bizarre. I was like, it's just random, kind of out of nowhere, like these two guys getting traded. From the Minnesota's perspective, like you mentioned, I liked it a lot for the depth pieces. I think I was a little higher on it than I think I seen a lot of like murmur about the trade, about that people weren't too high on the Minnesota side, but they're really hyper focused on the Randall Gobert fit. But I feel as if making this move is signaling that they're more in on like a guy like Naz Reid and Jaden McDaniels. I think this signals that they're comfortable with those guys and what those guys can provide. If it gives you a little semblance of what Cat would give you in those two guys, I think that's what they're kind of looking for. And Jaden's a defender. Nas is kind of like the floor spacer that Cat was. Maybe not as good as Cat on offense, because Cat is, like you said, all NBA talent. But can mimic some of those same type of actions that he can do. So I liked it from that perspective. The Randall and Gobert fit could be a little weird, clunky at times, but I think they're good enough players for it to work out. Like, it won't be the first time that Randall has played with a traditional big. He's just coming from New York, where he's playing with Mitchell Robinson and Isaiah Hartenstein. So playing with another big is not something he's unfamiliar with. The rest of the team shooting might need to step up, but I think DiVincenzo adding him there kind of helps with that as well. So all in all, I think for Minnesota, I kind of like it for them. For New York, those same questions I have is on the defensive end. How that's all going to pan out, because I think they did really good things with getting Mikal Bridges and getting OG Anunoby. They already had Josh Hart, but just adding those wing guys there, I think are great. OG can guard up, he can guard power forward, so that's not too much of an issue there. But I think you lose some of that defensive talent that you kind of added to your team when you bring a guy like Cat at the 5, like him as like your final stop, like your rim protector, your guy who's going to get maybe switch onto other smaller guards or play in drop, isn't really his strength. Like, you kind of have to do funkier stuff to make it easier for him on the defensive end, and Thibodeau hasn't been too keen on that. When Cat was with Minnesota, like we mentioned, he was young, but they had some of their worst defensive years. Thibodeau's had some of his worst defensive years with him on the team. A lot of that is the personnel and everything like that, but your big is going to set the tone for a lot of that as well. So I'm a little bit worried about their defense being, even though they're so great on the perimeter and they can mask a lot of the things that Cat might be weak at, it still gives me a little bit of nerves. But since he's such a great offensive player, he's able to play the 4. And then once Mitchell Robinson's healthy, I think that helps them out there if they need to be a little more defensive. I think offensively, this team should hum. Like, Brunson and Cat in the pick and roll should be just giving teams fits. Like, even a team like Philadelphia, I don't think like Embiid really wants to be chasing Cat around like the perimeter like that, or having to deal with Brunson in that type of way. So I think that would be fascinating on that end for sure.
Yeah, and like let's not forget, like Bridges had an offensive awakening when he went to Brooklyn. So you still have Bridges there, right? Like
Yeah.
I wonder, the other two contenders in the Eastern Conference are like Philadelphia and Boston. And I just think that like all of these teams like match up against each other really well. Like there's they're all kind of built the same way. Like one, like you've got a really good big, you've got a really good like forward, and you've got a really good guard,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um and so like I think amongst those three teams, like it's gonna be tough sledding amongst all of them. I think they'll have
Yeah.
more fits when one of those teams plays like, a Milwaukee or an Indiana, who are just like built differently,
Mm-hmm.
right? And run their offenses
Yeah,
differently.
then the matchup and style questions come into play, like which style
Yeah.
kind of wins out there, even though they might be like less talented. But I think we should get into it right now then, like talking about the Eastern Conference and those three teams. Looking at the Eastern Conference, we do have the ESPN Eastern Conference predictions, and like you mentioned, Boston, New York, Philly, right there occupying the 1 through 3 spots. Um, I think it's safe to say, as you mentioned, those are our contenders. Would you add anyone else from this ballpark there? Or I think you pretty much said on those guys. Like do the Bucks creep up in there at all, or are they still in that second tier there?
I think the Bucks lead the second tier. If anything, like I'd have the Bucks kind of like in between the two tiers. I could see them going either way. Like if they're healthy and it's working, I could see the Bucks being a contender team, and we're all saying to ourselves, why were we sleeping on Milwaukee? They have Giannis, they have Dame, they have Middleton. Like they're all healthy. It's working this year, right? Why did we sleep? However, it really didn't work last year, and it could go exactly the same way. You'll never be a bad team because you have Giannis.
Yeah.
Um,
Giannis and Dame gives you at least a playoff team, like
yeah,
at minimum. Yeah.
I think ESPN is high on the Cavs. The Cavs are a fairly deep team. There's like talent on it, but I don't know. I got to see more from that team. Like as much as I know, like a lot of people were really high on them last year, I just never got that sense where I was like, oh yeah, the Cavaliers, like that's a
They
team
never
to
really
watch out for.
struck fear into like other in my mind to other
Yeah,
teams, like some of like these other teams like a Bucks or even Philly would. Currently, and I think last year we were blowing them the entire season, and then come playoff time, they weren't really healthy, so we couldn't get our good read on it. So I think going into this season, I kind of feel the same way. Like they have good pieces. I'm not sure how it all fits. The Jared Allen and Evan Mobley thing, still a little awkward to me. Because I think Mobley at his best is going to be a 5. I think that
yeah,
kind of
same.
negates Jared Allen at that point. And then on the other end, with their backcourt, Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, I kind of feel like their kind of play styles don't mesh ideally together either. Like they're good enough to kind of make it work, but if in a perfect world, which I think is hard to find in this new NBA with these new CBA rules, I think it's hard to find the right fit for that. So you're not going to get the perfect guy next to Donovan or Garland, but I think they're good enough to make it work. And I'm still a little shallow on their wings, like Okoro and Strus. They're good players, they're fine players, but they kind of give you the opposite end of of each realm. Like one gives you great shooting, hard-nosed defense, and one guy's more of a slasher who's also more of a defender,
Yeah.
athletic defender who's a little smaller. So it is curious with me how they're gonna pan out. I myself, I probably wouldn't have them in that contenders realm. I think ESPN has them in that right ballpark. Like I don't think they're gonna finish 4th, but I feel like they're gonna be in that like bracket there with those other teams there, with the Milwaukee's, Orlando's, and Indiana, and maybe Miami, depending on health with them as well. But I think that's like your second tier of teams there. Of those, that first tier, those contenders tier, Boston, New York, and Philly. Who do you like the most entering this season? Is it just Boston by default, reigning champions, or do the Knicks or Philly pose questions to them that they haven't had to answer in years prior, or in at least the last year?
Well, I mean, we spent all of last year just talking about how complete Boston is, and they're the same team. They're like maybe almost exactly the same team.
Pretty much copy and paste.
Yeah. So they should be just like really good again. I do feel like Philly and New York improved this offseason. So in a way, yes, this Boston team hasn't seen this level of competition within their own conference, but now it's one of those instances where New York and Philadelphia have to show it, right? Like,
yeah,
Embiid's got to stay healthy. Paul George has to be like a real difference maker. The Maxey ascension needs to keep happening, all for Philadelphia. And then like these big home run swings in New York got to work, right? Like, like Cat, for example, is a player for all of the things that he does great, has flaws. And Bridges looked really good when he got all the ball usage, right? Like he was the only one in Brooklyn, but in Phoenix, like he was a good player.
Yeah,
he's a good
a good
player.
third option, good third, fourth option. So
and that's kind of where he's going back to, right?
And that's kind of like how OG is to me too. He's kind of like a third, fourth option. They have like those type of guys on their team. I am worried about New York's depth in that Thibodeau system, because I don't see much depth on that team. And if any of those starting five, I think their starting five is legit. Like I think their starting five can compete with pretty much anybody. Should give Boston a hard time. Should give Philly a hard time. That starting five, I would still take Boston starting five currently, but I think that starting five is, as it's been talked about, is one of the better ones. But once you break it down, and we know OG's health situation isn't always there, or I don't think any year has been fully healthy since entering the league. We know that in a typical system, you guys are going to be playing upwards of 30 to 40, closer to 40 minutes, logging minutes, heavy minutes. And we know what that does to NBA players' bodies by the time we get to the playoff time. So that's my worry when it comes to New York. I think they'll battle through every game. They're going to have that Thibodeau DNA in them. They're going to be strong. They're going to play teams hard, especially with Josh Hart being a featured player there, and Brunson being a featured player there. So I'm not worried on that end, but I am worried about, like we mentioned earlier, the defense from Brunson and Cat and what Thibodeau does to mitigate that, and the depth in the long run. But how about Philly? Like Philly are the third there. They made a big splash earlier on in the offseason, so it's kind of forgotten about now, but they did acquire Paul George through free agency. How do you see them fitting into this Eastern Conference landscape? And Paul George, I guess, coming back into the East. He was on Indiana before, but he's been out West for quite some time, and now he's back in the East.
With Philly, and this was kind of the problem they had last year. They never really had assets to necessarily improve. Their asset was this offseason was just cap space, right? And they spent it all on one guy. Which, makes sense. Stars run the NBA. But honestly, beyond those three guys, I don't know who plays for Philly right now. I'd have to actually go and look at their roster to be like, who else is playing on this team? And that's going to be their issue all year, is can they find role players to fit around these three guys that, it's going to work, right? Like if this was, and like Philly is not a team that like, I think of when I think of teams that find no-name guys and make them successful. I think of like the Miami Heat when that happens, right? If this was the Heat and those three guys played for the Heat and everybody else was just like somebody I'd never heard of, I'd be really afraid of the Heat. Yeah. But because it's Philly, I'm just like, I want you to show me, right? Like I want it to be, I have confidence in them, but like if
They're
they're
still a team since
yeah,
Embiid has been there, hasn't made it past the second round.
yeah,
At
and
the end of the day,
if
with
their season
all the
went
iterations, that Embiid has had, different machinations, different star players here and there, different coaches, hasn't made it out the second round. So I could feel you when you're like, I'm not sold on them, even if they look good on paper.
yeah, and it's one of those things that like if the season went sideways on Philadelphia, like I wouldn't be like crazy shocked, right? I know we'd see all these like national pieces where they'd be like, "Oh my god, Philadelphia, how did this not work?" And it's like just think about it for like 2 minutes. Like who else is on this team? This team
Right.
could as easily not work as it could be really good.
Yeah, I can see it both ways. What's going in favor for them a little more than in the past is having Nick Nurse there. I think
I
that's a
like Nick
big.
Nurse. I'm a
Yeah,
fan.
I think he keeps them a little bit more competitive when they do inevitably go through some injury woes. Because you have Paul George on your team, you have Joel Embiid on your team. Those are your two main guys. Your starting five is projected to be Tyrese, Kelly Oubre, Paul George, Caleb Martin, coming over from Miami, and Joel Embiid. So yeah, fine starting five, not as explosive as Boston or even maybe New York at this point, but respectable and solid all the same. But when you go into their depth and you're looking at Kyle Lowry, Eric Gordon, a lot of older guys, and then you're mixing them with some younger guys with KJ Martin, it's kind of just all over the place. So I think a guy like Nick Nurse is going to have to do a lot of work of just making sure that those role guys are doing what they need to be doing to help their core guys win. And I think we're going to have to expect injury with these guys because Paul George always injured. Embiid always injured. He did have a quote coming out of media day that he really wants to focus on his health this year. So maybe he's not going to take the season
He
as hard.
lost some weight this offseason,
He
which
lost
is
some
kind of
weight.
like I never I know Joel is like a big guy, but I never thought of him as being like too big, you know?
Right.
Because he moves well. He moves really well. He's light on his feet. He's very strong defensively. Um, he's a strong man as well. So it's like I never thought of him as being too big. So I'm really interested to see what like a slightly leaner Joel
Joel
Embiid
Embiid.
uh turns out, right? Like hopefully that's the key and he stays healthy all year. That would be amazing.
Yeah,
Right?
I'm hoping for his legs. It's just his legs. His knees can withstand
Yeah.
all the the longevity of a season. I think that's what the lightness is for, just to make sure that his lower body can withstand a full NBA season. Hoping that's the case. We'll see if that's the case. It's kind of refreshing for him to, for once, go into an NBA season not chasing an accolade. It feels like the last few years until you got that MVP was kind of always aiming for that first before the playoff success. But now it looks like his mentality has changed. He's getting to the later stages of his prime. So I think that's more on his mind. Winning a championship, with his health issues, you don't know when he's going to go. So I think that being a focus should help them. I think Maxey coming into his own is a real big key for them. And Paul George, I'm really unsure about how he's gonna be on this team. Like I think he's a perfect fit in between Maxey and Embiid. I think he's the type of guy that can handle the ball if needed to, but he's really good at like coming off of screens and playing off ball and doing secondary stuff. He was good with that with Kawhi. He was good with that with Westbrook. Like he's a good second fiddle type of guy. Not in a bad way, just like a second option type of guy who can, if needed, if Embiid is out, if Maxey is out, can carry an offense for a game or two.
No, I mean like I agree. Like on a different team, he'd carry the offense like not just a game or two. He'd do it for like most of the year. Um, but he's another one of those players where it's just like I've reached the point where I just want him to show me something else.
Exactly.
Um,
We know you guys can do well in the season. We know you guys
yeah,
can have like great season stats and all that type of stuff. But for Paul George and for Embiid, I think those two in particular, I think this is gonna come down to the postseason. Um, looking further down this list, I guess the Bucks too is a similar situation. I think I think they're happy that they're gonna have the training camp to kind of work some things out that they never got to do with the new coach. To be fair, Doc Rivers never got a training camp with this group, so he has that now. So hopefully, we won't be hearing about how he didn't have a training camp in the middle of the season. He can't use that excuse this year. Um, but I think with the Bucks, it comes back to something that we talked about last year with Chris Middleton. I thought they should move. I think we both kind of thought they should have moved off of him last offseason. I think now you're kind of seeing that again. He's hurt entering into the season again. Don't know exactly what his timetable is at this point, but that's not looking favorable. Brooke is older. Um, are we gonna see a fall off from the Bucks, or are we gonna see them get it together? Find a groove with Doc Rivers, and they got some younger guys on there. They got DeLon Wright to pick up some of the defensive end on the this year. So do we see that as being? Do we see this as being a year for the Bucks into the future, or do we see this a step back and maybe them having to reassess where they are and retool a bit?
I think if it doesn't work out this year, they have no choice. Like they're too old in many ways. Like as you say, like Brooke Lopez, like that guy's is an elder statesman. Chris Middleton, like he either gets healthy and returns to the player he was, or he's just like that's it. That's it. He's like done. He's never gonna be back to like that guy. And in which case he is a negative asset on your team. And like you're not gonna trade Giannis, so you either have to retool around him, and you got enough stuff to like move and help contenders that like you can retool on the fly. You just got to be like I think we weren't going to talk about the NBA Cup, but I think the NBA Cup might be the thing to tell Milwaukee what they have to do this year. Like if they do really well and the team is looking great, then yeah, roll with it. But like if you're flaming out in the NBA Cup, and like nothing's working by that point in the season, like blow it up. You got to blow it up like right away. And I'm not saying like strip it back to picks, like trade for good young players, find good young players, make some trades, take advantage of teams who really want to contend and are willing to give up some young talent to do it. Right.
Yeah. I definitely think this is a make or break year for the Bucks. For a lot of those guys. Yeah, Middleton, this is going to be, I think, his last year of really showing what he can bring value to. If he has any value left, it'll be this year for him to show it. I know Brooke, they're kind of dangling to trade at the beginning of the offseason, and they kind of pulled that back. I think it was kind of to do with, I don't think they had too many takers for him. But he is valuable when he's healthy, but he's at his age. He's been here for a long, long time now. And it's kind of a risk to kind of bank on him. So I think I'm going to be looking more towards them doing a retool sooner than later. I think regardless of how they look early on, I think those vets are just at the time where they just need to be moved on from, and you got to retool this thing. Giannis is still young. He won an NBA championship. He had 50 points in the closeout game, and it's just forgotten. Like that should not be like forgotten history. Like that is an incredible thing to accomplish.
Old news, yeah.
Yeah, like we don't even like speak on Giannis's accomplishments anymore. But it's partly because this Bucks team has been so underwhelming ever since then. They've brought nothing for us to be really excited about. They flamed out against Miami in the first round a couple years ago. They flamed out this year due to kind of injury again. So I think this is a make or break year for this core. And if it's not looking good early on, like maybe the NBA Cup is a good indication. They got some better course this year, so maybe you have a little bit more motivation this year to see what you have during that time. And if you don't like what you see, I think you got to cut bait kind of as soon as possible, because I can't see this lasting too much longer with them. I guess looking further down, any of these teams in the Eastern Conference that you would consider kind of a dark horse to make some noise in a year where we really maybe not see it.
So I like Orlando. I think that they're on a similar trajectory to what, Oklahoma was on. I don't think they'll be like top of the East, but there's a ton of talent on that team, a ton of depth. They could make a trade or two. They could do the Oklahoma thing and just go through it the entire season just to get like a firm understanding of what they have and where they stand. Miami, to me, is a team that will go as far as Jimmy Butler's spite goes. Like the fact that he didn't get his extension and that like, the front office is talking like, oh, do we really want to commit to this guy? Like that's the kind of stuff that gets Butler going. And he could either be great or he could be a Houston Rocket by the end of the year. Indiana, I loved them last year. I just want to see it again. They're betting on the kids getting better. They didn't really. I was hoping they would do more this offseason. They would like.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to kind of ask you. With Indiana, because I might be a little lower on Indiana entering this year than last year. But between Indiana and Orlando, who do you think is going to have the better year? I think ESPN has them basically a game separating them two. But Indiana, they were the Eastern Conference. They're in the Eastern Conference Finals last year.
Yeah, Eastern Conference Finals, NBA Cup Finals,
and they're down here rated as or ranked as the 7th best team in the Eastern Conference prediction wise, and they're not getting any respect in being like a top 5 team below Cleveland. Like for a team that accomplished so much, they made that big swing last year to get Pascal Siakam to bring him in and pair him next to Miles Turner and Tyrese Halliburton. Do we see them in a tier above, or do we see them on that lower end of the Eastern Conference?
I think they're a middle tier team. I don't think they're a lower playoff, like trying to stay out of the play-in tournament type team. I think but there's a lot of good teams over there in the East. Like when you look at that, right? Like do you want to count out Cleveland or the Bucks or Miami or like there's some talent in there. And then like you look at this ESPN conference predictions and like the difference between 8 and 9, for example, is massive. But everybody above that is like really tight. So I see it. I feel like year over year, just betting on your own guys, like Orlando should get like more better. That's not great grammar, but more better than Indiana. Yeah, there's just more guys on the Magic that are likely to improve significantly just through being in the league longer and getting older in key roles as well than like Indiana's currently like betting on. Like I don't see Pascal getting necessarily better. I being the same, and like Tyrese Halliburton like might get a touch better, but like I think he's kind of like who he's gonna be now. So you're betting on like Nemhards and Benedict Mathurin's to get like significantly better. Meanwhile, like with the Magic, it's like Paolo and Franz, and like I still really like that Anthony Black kid.
John Suggs, yeah.
You got Suggs. There's like a lot of guys that I still expect some like leaps from for Orlando. That'll be an interesting like 2 teams to watch all year long to see who does better.
Yeah, I think those are 2.
Be it the Magic or be it the Pacers. Yeah,
I think those are 2 to track for sure in the Eastern Conference. Just I think their stories are kind of similar but different in the sense that like they went about it different ways, but similar tier team. Yeah, I think looking down there, I think there's not many other surprises I see in the Eastern Conference. I think, Detroit, Charlotte, Brooklyn are all going to kind of be in your bottom tier there. Raptors, Chicago, Atlanta are probably like your next like play-in tier. And then, Miami, Orlando, Pacers. I am the Miami. I have Miami favoritism here. So I do feel it's a dangerous game with Miami to be optimistic with their outlook. But I do feel Hami and Jovic got some real good experience last year because all the guys were out, and they got to play a ton of minutes, and they got to play against Boston in the playoffs. Got to start against them too. I think those reps matter. I like their draft pick, just for the front court depth. Even if he doesn't play right
I
away,
like
he
the
might.
draft pick as well. Like Khalil
He,
Ware, like
yeah,
that
yeah.
pick. Yeah.
I like at the minimum, he looks like a guy that should be able to come off the bench. He might do a little G League stint, but I think by the end of the year, at least will be coming off the bench to give Bam some backup minutes and give you a different look. So I like that. I like that they're being very intentional with how they're dealing with the Hero Rozier thing. I think letting those two guys kind of figure out how they can play off of each other and giving Hero the chance to be sort of the secondary ball handler and not be a primary ball handler for once, I think should be beneficial to him. And like you said, you have Jimmy, who could be super motivated because he wants to get his money. He's kind of downplaying it a little bit in media day, like he's not too concerned about it. He wants to stay with the Heat and all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, he would have signed an extension if he was getting the money that he wanted. So I think that's one to track. I think not giving him the extension forces him to have a good season because no matter where he wants to go, he's gonna have to play well and surely he's available to get paid. So I think the Heat will play into that. And I think they can make a run for at least a top 5-ish seed this year. Because I think they're going to focus a lot on their health, being that they're a play-in team the last 2 years consecutively, and they don't really aspire to do that at all.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think I like Tyler Hero more than most people. I think he's going to have a pretty good year. Bam, like I know I'm not an Olympics guy, but Bam going and playing with the Olympic team, I think is just going to help him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting things to like about Miami this year. And one thing I admire about that organization is if it's not working, they're gonna do something about it right away.
Yeah,
Right?
if
They
this
don't
build,
wait.
if this build doesn't work, like if the Hero thing doesn't work out through the middle of the year, if any of that, I think that they're gonna, like last year they moved Kyle Lowry and moved that for Terry Rozier that was questionable, but they did something because it wasn't working, so they had to do something, and they felt like they needed to do something to retool and to continue to compete. So yeah, I think if this doesn't work out, they know they're in the window where they kind of have to win with the situation that Jimmy's in. So I think they continue along that path. Yeah, how about your Raptors? how do we feel about them?
The Raptors to me are a team that's gonna like lose a lot of games by 2 possessions. Right? They're gonna be in a lot of games, but I don't know if they've got like that killer instinct closing talent on the team just yet. And like a lot needs to go right for the Raptors in order for them to have like a good season. Like there's a lot of young guys who are going to get reps, but they're going to make mistakes, right? I could see them either like competing for a play-in spot or trading like a Jakob Poeltl and Bruce Brown and just like getting what they can for their remaining assets and just going all young, all Barnes, all Quickly, all Barrett, and whomever else they can add to that, right? But it's also like it's supposed to be a really good draft year, so if it's not working early, I hope that they commit early. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one thing with the Raptors. They tend to wait a little bit on that.
Yeah.
on committing which way they want to go. Yeah, I think like we're looking at Indiana and the Magic. I think with similar outlook could be outlook for Chicago and Toronto. I think they're in that same type of bubble there. I think if we look at, I don't see why the Bulls should win 4 more games than the Raptors, unless the Raptors are intentionally trying to lose games and get into that flag point. But I think the Bulls have more incentive to get into the Cooper flag discussion than the Raptors do. You still have some young guys. You still have Quickly. You still have RJ Barrett. You still have Scotty Barnes there. So you have some young guys already, and you kind of just need to build on those guys. But I am a little more intrigued with the Raptors this year, just because I think there was some stuff that we're beginning to show with RJ quickly, especially near the end of that year. So I'm wondering when you add back Barnes, how that kind of manifests itself with a healthy roster going into the year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited. I kind of I like watching a team that's like rising and like trying to do something different than just like the same old team being trotted out there. And like a lot of fan bases are going to go through this year where it's like, oh, this team is just last year's team.
Right.
So I'm kind of excited. There's some things to like look out for, to watch. There's a lot of young guys. Raptors drafted 4 kids like this past season. So there's like a lot of young talent on the team to like see what they've got, how they're going to develop. I'm interested. I'm very interested. I'm not so worried about the wins and losses, so I am interested.
Yeah.
Looking at the rest of them though, like I don't know why. And this will be my Detroit from last year vibes. But I feel like Charlotte is either just going to be like the Utah Jazz from last year, where they're just like good early for no reason, right? And you're like, what is Charlotte? Or, you know, they're going to be part of a 3-team trade that gets, you know, LaMelo to the Bucks.
You always have one of those for us.
I like some 2K trades. Yeah.
You know, the thing is, we did posit that LaMelo for Cat thing. Do you think that would have been a better deal for Minnesota to go for the LaMelo route than to do what they ultimately did with get a little bit more depth in Randall? Because LaMelo would have given Anthony Edwards a dynamic backcourt partner for sure for years to come.
So this really comes down to how you view Anthony Edwards, in my opinion. Is he like one of these heliocentric guard players like a Luka Doncic, where you just want him handling the ball all the time and really just running the offense and taking over all the decision making, and he is the team and everybody else works around him? Or is Anthony Edwards a guy who needs a guy, right? Who needs somebody to pull a little defensive power their way, make some plays, and really like let Edwards cook, but in an off-ball way? We're going to see. I mean, a lot of it really depends on how Minnesota is deployed this year, right? Like Minnesota is a very interesting team from like a coaching standpoint this year.
Right.
And Edwards' development is going to be a lot of that. Like I love the kid. So they were doing media day with him and they were like, hey, so you just spent time with LeBron James and KD and Steph. When you were doing like workouts and stuff, did you take anything from them? And he's like, they did. Right.
Like, gotta give it back to them.
Right. I love that kid. He's all confidence. But you know, as much as he's this amazing scorer and he's this amazing basketball player, is he a guy that you just run your whole team through? And that's probably the one question remaining. And he doesn't have to be, right? Like Kobe and Michael, these are amazing players. They weren't guys who were like always bringing the ball up, always having the ball, always waiting for the last like 7 seconds of a possession to figure out something, right?
Right.
I mean, they demanded the ball and they were given it because they were the guy you wanted to take.
But they needed someone else there to kind of ease their offensive load if they were ever going to win a championship. Like they weren't doing it all
to do some work. Yeah.
They're going to do it all to win. Yeah, I think this is a big year. We'll talk about the West next week, but I think this is a big year for Anthony Edwards from that perspective. We're going to, I guess, either this year or next year, we're going to see exactly what his potential is going to lead out to. Like, is he that guy? Is he that guy that can be, like you say, like a Luka type guy? Or is he more of like a or is he more like of a Tatum type guy who needs more of a supporting cast, more of a supporting role to really embellish what he's really good at? I think this is the year to kind of see that. They're going to make this trade, get rid of Cat to bring in some more role-ish guys who could play next to him, and I think that leads to us seeing what he can do on that end of the court.
Man, I'm just excited. Basketball's back, Brandon. Like, it's back.
We're just about
like there. We get answers.
Yeah, we finally do. I think that will do it for this episode of the NBA Hangout. You can follow us at the NBA Hangout on Twitter, X. You can follow me at BJY93_. You can follow Dave here every week. Like and subscribe.
Shout out to you. Shout out to you for wearing the best Raptors jersey of all time.
Might be the second best. I couldn't get the purple that they have that they're bringing back this year, but this one ain't too bad. A little Damian Stoudemire.
It's all about the dinosaur, buddy.
Yeah. Gotta have the dino. Thank y'all for hanging out with us. Peace.